it's actually quite striking how much the markets are responding to the words of a man who's declaring victory in Iran. It's the same person who declared victory in the 2020 election. Um, what are we learning?
Hi, I'm Fergus Macphee, and welcome to the Trump Report. You can watch us every day on our YouTube channel, Monday to Friday, and you can also listen to the show twice a week wherever you get your podcasts. Joining me today is Justin Wolfers, Professor of Public Policy and Economics at the University of Michigan. Justin, I always appreciate chatting to you. How are you?
Good, mate. It's you always manage to call me when the world's a little bit upside down.
I do, and if I go straight into it, when I actually called you yesterday and set this interview up, we were in a slightly different position than we're in now.
Yeah, well, maybe we were, maybe we weren't. So the problem right now, we're talking about the Iran war, of course, is no one knows what the American strategy is. No one knows if we're in for a short time or a long time, or maybe just a good time, although that one I doubt. And so we're all just trying to parse every comment coming out of the president's mouth, which is, if you've ever heard the president before, is a very dangerous thing to do. And so basically what you get is news from Iran that it looks like, they're not rolling over straight away. And then people realize stuff in the Middle East never quite works out as easily as you might hope it does. And then oil prices go up and stocks go down. And then the president will declare not victory, but something that looks like victory. And then it's like, oh, this is a bloke who can really just change his mind and get the heck out of there. And then we get oil prices down and stock prices up. And then Pete Hegseth wakes up and he says, geez, we're going to fight till we crush them. We know how long that takes. And then you get the opposite again. Reality may not be changing, but our understanding of it is, because we understand so little of it.
Yeah, you kind of illustrated it there. Like I said, when I spoke to you yesterday, markets were going like that, oil prices were going like that. I think at one point it hit $119 a barrel, and now it's sort of back below 90. Some of the quotes that Trump came out with last night, he said that the war would end very soon. They're very far ahead of schedule, very complete, pretty much. Obviously, he said 10 days ago, he said that the war would last sort of 5 to 6 weeks. We'll get into some of those other comments you mentioned in a moment. But a skeptic looking at those might say that he saw the markets and the price of oil and thought, I've got to change tack. Is taco back?
So the first thing is, it's actually quite striking how much the markets are responding to the words of a man who's declaring victory in Iran. It's the same person who declared victory in the 2020 election. What are we learning? But yes, Fergus, one possibility is that, and I think this is more true of Trump than any other world leader I'm aware of. He can just declare success in the face of facts and back off, which is actually it's a great political skill, actually. Most others build the case for war for months and feel they can't change their mind for years. So the ability to reverse course, I admire in almost anyone. The question you ask is that actually what he's doing? And I think declaring half victory and then backing off and then letting Hegseth go out and undeclare victory suggests there's not actually a serious media strategy or communication strategy here. If there's a military strategy, that'd be great too.
On the backing off, obviously Trump then spoke again last night. And as you said, Pete Hegseth has spoken today saying that today will be the most intense strikes yet, but it's not sort of 2003. It's all quite muddled, the stuff that's been said. I've seen quite a few people suggesting, I want to get your take on this because I'm not sure how much I read into this. Some people have been suggesting that this is just market manipulation.
It's a very popular view among good left-leaning liberals who both hate the president and are trying to make sense of the current situation. So much of what he's done is exactly what you would do if you were trying to manipulate markets, because he moves forward, he listens to markets, he moves back. It's completely clear if you had inside information at the White House, you could do enormously well. We do see some small number of people betting on things like Polymarket, making small fortunes, but there's much, much bigger money to be made in stocks, in futures, in options, in crypto. I don't know the right answer here. The president has already found lots of other ways of monetizing the presidency. I Does that mean he's doing it this way? I mean, he's got lots of other ways of doing it. We're a little bit close to conspiratorial for my comfort there, but the real answer, right? You asked me a question that's fundamentally about an unknown fact. The unknown fact is the president trading on this information? The true answer is that nobody knows, and so therefore, whatever your prior is your posterior.
I think I'm with you there. And when I saw that, I thought it strayed too far into the realms of conspiratorial too. So we'll move on. I will ask you to do a little favor for me if you can. So, from an economist standpoint, it might be really crude, but what might be the sort of upshot of finances in people's pockets in the US and around the world if the war does end next week, like he said, maybe yesterday, or if it drags on?
Yeah. So I appreciate the fact you apologized for the question, because the number of times I've had to go on US cable TV while we're bombing people, potentially including an elementary school. And the first, second, and third questions I get are about the implications for oil prices, gas prices, and kitchen table issues.
We have a little bit more time here on the Trump report, so we can really get a dig in.
Yeah. So you can ask the same question, but apologize first, which is totally different. No. I adore you, sir. Look, here's a simple rule of thumb. If oil prices go up 10%, gas or petrol prices go up 10%. At the moment, oil prices are up roughly 40%. So far, we've seen gas prices go up roughly 20%. That says there's more to come. So don't be surprised if you see gasoline prices near $4 a gallon in the United States, which for those of you in Europe would seem unbelievably cheap. But that's because we don't like to tax fossil fuels. We think they're terrific. But are very expensive and very politically salient here in the US. I think the question you asked me, though, was a deeper one. You said, if Trump backs off, what does it mean for mums and dads? First of all, if he backs off, bring the troops home, back out. The first answer is that most of the worst damage of this goes away. First of all, oil. There's two channels to think about. I invite people to think about two channels. People focus on one. One is the oil channel. If you can get oil out of the ground and through the Strait of Hormuz on a boat, everything goes back to normal. Oil prices go back down. Petrol prices go back down. Everything's simple. What I think people aren't talking enough about is there's a second channel, which is this is not an oil shock. This is a war. And wars carry a lot of things with them. Wars are traditionally the last resort. They're the last resort because they destroy lives, they destroy families, they destroy societies, and they destroy economies. They do so in very diffuse ways. So if you're Iran, it's not diffuse. You walk outside and there's no buildings. If you're the United States, it's much more diffuse. It's much more diffuse because we're not getting bombed. There's not necessarily boots on the ground and so on. But if you were to draw an analogy, and it's an imperfect one to be sure, with the war with Iraq, what you discovered is that Donald Rumsfeld said we'd be in and out. He thought it would take 6 days, maybe 6 weeks. He doubts 6 months. It ultimately took more than 6 years, which means that Rumsfeld estimates the reality was more than 365 times worse than what Rumsfeld said it would be. And that reality plays out in lots of different ways. One is radicalization of local populations. Another is you get a fracturing of the globe, whether it's in terms of security or in terms of trade. Another is a loss of confidence. There's real questions. Remember, the United States before Iraq bothered to call other countries and bring them along for the ride. This time we didn't. And Fergus, you can tell me, what are the conversations occurring in Europe about whether Europe and the US is now one security bloc or two?
We've had plenty of guests mentioning that exact point right here on the Trump report.
Okay. And so the point is, if it becomes two, then that's expensive for both. You got to buy bombs and we got to buy bombs. And so there's long-run fiscal implications, very, very large. If you look at the history of government debt, whether it's in Britain or in the United States, the big ups are all wars because buying bombs is really, really expensive. If you think about what happens to soldiers, they come back with PTSD and they spend a lifetime less productive, which is the economic side of it. The more personal side is terrified. They're reliant on the Veterans Affairs. It's a very, very expensive game. And that's that second channel. And the problem is, I think the question you asked was, if we reverse course, what happens next? So if we reverse course tomorrow, we won't have a lot of people with PTSD. That's a set of costs that won't exist. These ongoing security conversations where Europe is arming itself separately from the United States, they continue. And that in turn means the US has to arm itself. That means less money for teachers, roads, and schools. It probably has implications for global trade. And the whole thing just gets rewired. This is meant to be the last thing we ever do.
And in terms of that, who gets to decide that as well? I know the US, like Hexit today, have been really bolshy and essentially saying, we have the power. We're going to decide whether to end this war. Iran said differently last night. I mean, even if the US pulls out, you'd imagine trade and oil routes would still be disrupted.
For some time, I'm less worried about oil in the United States. Now, you're coming to me from Europe. So the United States is, roughly speaking, energy independent. In fact, we are a net exporter of petroleum products. So what that means is, because American oil drillers can sell their oil abroad, when oil's $100 a barrel in Europe, they'll never sell it to an American for less than $99. So we get the same increase in price that you do. But the fact that we have as many producers as many barrels produced as consumed means, for my family, I'm going to pay more at the pump. My gas price goes up. But if I happen to own an oil company, I'm producing as many barrels, but now I'm getting more money. And so there's no flow of wealth out of the United States. There's a redistribution from mums and dads to oil companies, and a redistribution from the Rust Belt where I live toward the drilling areas, toward Alaska and Texas and so on. That's not the case in Europe. In Europe, you're intensely energy dependent. And this, I think, is actually something that's very, very interesting. And I don't think people have appreciated enough the politics of this. If you watch US financial markets, the effects of this war have been dramatic, yet still substantially larger than Europe. So the effects on Europe are double or maybe quadruple or maybe even larger than that here in the US. So when you're walking around saying, oh, the economic consequences of oil, it's because you don't have a bunch of producers who are getting rich at the same time. So you guys are actually hurting more than we are. This is one of the big problems of TACO as a governing philosophy. If what you do is you look to markets and then you respond, but American markets aren't responding, only our allies are, then perhaps the president continues with this adventure because it's not actually hurting America that much.
I know you don't want to make predictions, but can you just get inside the mind of Donald Trump for a second? And do you think this is going to be a TACO? Is what he said last night, do you think, much more likely than what's been come out today?
I have been absolutely relentless, and I'm going to continue, which is any question that begins with, what do you think is between the president's ears? I will defer to someone else. I'm sure there's a different form of the question, but for my own sanity, I have to stick with that. Let me try and restate your question so I can answer it. How confident am I either that the war ends soon or that it continues indefinitely? I think there's tremendous uncertainty. That's not just me. That's why financial markets are going up and down. The president just lets out a verbal burp and it's worth billions of dollars on the stock market. And it's because none of us know how this ends. With a traditional power, what you say today binds what you do tomorrow. And so digging into something like this, you worry you're stuck. We have even more unknowns now because the president does get stuck. He got stuck on tariffs. He got unstuck a bunch of times, but he ended up getting stuck again. So I think there's no more honest posture than tremendous uncertainty.
from a purely economic view as well, like I'm not an economist. I would never claim to say that about myself at all. But we do a show called The Tech Report, which you've appeared on, and we talk a lot there about the huge sort of valuation of AI firms, for example, how important those are to the markets. Does anything that's happened in the last 24 hours, it sounds obvious to say, just crystallize that oil and fossil fuels really still are king?
Um, yes, I think that's right. Let me try and explain something to your audience. You might be confused at a moment like this when two large countries are potentially at war with each other or are at war with each other. Why the hell Fergus and I are talking about financial markets? But actually, there's a really serious reason why we are. There's immense uncertainty about the future. You feel it right now. You don't know what's going to happen next. And if you're at all like me, you're thirsty for information about what might happen next. And well, I could turn on the TV, but what I'm going to see is Republican talking heads say everything's okay. And I'm going to see Democratic talking heads say everything's terrible. I could try and work my sources in Iran, but if I told you the truth, I don't have any. I could try calling an expert, but to be honest, it's very hard to tell an expert on Iran from someone miming it. And so what I want is some indicator of how things are going over there, which reflects the views of many people, because we tend to believe that the average of many people's perspectives is better than any one individual. That's the so-called wisdom of crowds. And I'd want something where people were putting their money where their mouth is rather than just repeating empty, hollow talking points. And so they need to have skin in the game. That's what financial markets do. And the other great thing about financial markets is you and I are deeply wondering about what's going to happen next, but that's just about it. The thing is, in financial markets, if you can do more research, if you can research the history of Iran, the history of war, people on the ground, their satellite photo imagery, and so on, you can make money. And so these market prices are coming to reflect the aggregation of many profit-oriented people trying to track what's going on over there. Now, the future of Iran is not the same as the future of American business. And when you're looking at stock markets, you're looking at bets on the future of American business. But they're highly correlated, particularly right now. And so I just think of this as being the least bad index of what's going on. And that's why we're spending so much time looking at financial markets. It's not that I wake up in the morning and think, boy, I wonder about the S&P 500. I hope its feelings haven't been hurt. I think it's the single best aggregator of information at a very foggy moment like this.
Well, can we move on to another aggregator of information, which I know you've spoken about? Because the last time we spoke was almost a month ago today. We spoke about US job data that was released. I think you said was kind of the most healthiest in a while, the most encouraging. Yet straight off that, if you could look in February, and the US lost 92,000 jobs in February, despite expecting a rise of, I think, 55,000. What has happened in that month?
So what had happened was you probably heard some degree of pessimism from me over our various conversations together, if not pessimism, fear about the state of the US economy. And that previous job report sort of showed green shoots, and I was led to this question like, am I too pessimistic? I allowed myself a smile, and it turns out, no, shouldn't have. The subsequent data came out and said what looked in the data like a positive movement, in fact, was statistical noise, and it never happened. That's what a data revision is. We now have better data, and it says it never happened. So the upturn never happened, and the most recent data are even worse. I don't want to bore you with numbers. They mean a lot to me, but to your audience, it's always hard to know what these numbers are that economists talk about. So I'm going to use words instead. Since Liberation Day, the US economy has lost jobs. That's, I believe the British would say, that's bad. So we could call it a jobs recession. So whether it's a recession, I think still remains to be seen. But at a minimum, I could say that where A, everything we were promised didn't happen, and B, we're in a very precarious moment.
And how do you, I don't want to extrapolate too much from the US to the UK, but in the UK, election cycle comes around, the economy and jobs are so important. How on earth, if you're Donald Trump, I mean, we're probably a long way past this, but how on earth do you go and sell that to the public?
Well, my hope is that he's not running for re-election because the Constitution prevents it. Um, there's midterms coming up, and it's all that anyone talks about over here. Um, Republicans are expected to lose the House. It's meant to be a bloodbath. That's increasingly what seems likely. Look, the issue isn't just that the president is overseeing a very weak economic period. There are deep questions about how much a president typically affects the economy, although I think this president gets to use that excuse a little less than others, given the ways in which he's intervened so robustly. Um, the you know the it's not just the economy's bad. The president has lost the war of ideas, and the truth is he's not trying. Normally, what you do if you have a new policy, whether it's go to Iran or add tariffs or take from the poor and give to the rich, is you articulate a theory of the case. You convince people. You Marshall Evans. You have your nerds put out white papers, and on it goes. The president hasn't bothered. So many of these policies that are actually pretty easy to sell are polling very, very badly. So but people are both depressed about the reality of the economy, and they're not sold. And in fact, they're actually very resistant to the president's policy impulses.
Are you worried?
Yeah. I saw the funniest economic indicator the other day. Someone said the size of the bags under my eyeballs. It feels a bit odd to be an economic indicator. And, maybe with a bit of plastic surgery, I could fix that economic indicator. But, look, mate, I've been worried throughout the Trump administration. The reality is that industrialized countries have it so good. We can always do better, so we should always complain and we should always push people to do better. But the reality is that you and I live in two of the richest countries in the world at the richest moment in world history. It's really quite extraordinary. But it's fragile. Countries can lose that edge. And it's most fragile when people are prepared to trample the institutions that are the foundation of that prosperity. So it is not fragile in Australia. It's not fragile in Canada. I'm going to let you speak for Britain, but it is currently profoundly fragile in the United States.
It certainly feels a little fragile to me, someone living and working in Britain. I just want to ask you one more question before you go about the jobs data. Are you weren't, I don't think last time we spoke, if I remember rightly, are you confident yet in saying that this is kind of the impact of AI starting to show?
I still don't think, first of all, monthly data go like this. So let's just, I think AI is the most interesting economic story of our age. I think it's going to transform the economy in ways we can't yet imagine. I think who and what and when and where and how people benefit is totally up for grabs, and policy and voters can really determine that. It's the conversation we're not having while we talk about tariffs, when we talk about war, and we talk about the fragility of democracy, and that's a big mistake. Having said all that, the key question is AI, the question you just asked is AI a big part of what's going on in the labor market? It's clear a lot of bosses are using it as the excuse when they want to fire people they were probably going to fire anyway. The most important piece of evidence that it is AI is that young college graduates are finding it hard to find work. The counter to that is the US is currently in what we're calling a low hire, low fire labor market, where no one's losing their jobs and no one's getting fired. And that's enough to keep things pretty steady, except for the fact if you're a young person who just graduated college, the no hire part is a real pain in your ass. And so they're finding it a lot harder to get hired. That phenomenon has almost nothing to do with AI. And then I think I gave you a very similar answer last time, Fergus, because the truth doesn't change month to month. But I'll give you the asterisk I didn't give you last month, which is there are clearly distinct industries that are changing. So my advice to the audience is if you're in college, do not become a translator. That job now is 100% AI.
Justin Wolfers, thank you so much for joining us on the Trump Report.
A pleasure, mate.